Happy Sunday, everybody. Hope you're all enjoying the Duskmourn meta as we get into the end here of week 3. Every Sunday, what I like to do is go over my top performing off-meta picks. So these are all Mythic decks, or decks that people successfully piloted into Mythic with at least 50 games, and with at least a 60% win rate, and with a good placement, a good climb, not doing any MMR shenanigans or matchmaking shenanigans. So these are all coming up against the most common decks in the meta, at least from what I can tell. So this is all done through the Untapped tracker, which if you would like to help support the channel, you can download the tracker with my affiliate link in the description, and has access to a whole bunch of data for Magic the Gathering. So that's where we get these decks, is from their MetaBreaker page. So with that, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what's going on. So in Best of 1, we have a problem a little bit with the Heartfire Hero is in the top 5 top performing decks, right? So every Monday I talk about my Best of 1, Best of 3 meta review, where we talk about the top performing decks, and so I've tried not to do overlap this today with with those decks. And so Boros Auras, Mardu Aggro, Rakdos Aggro, and Jund Aggro, Gruul Aggro sometimes, they're all different versions of the same deck that are centered around that mouse core in mono red. So it's probably going to be facing a ban, hopefully, in Foundations. We'll see. But for the time being, let's talk about something other than the Heartfire Hero combos, right? I actually do have one in the list here that is, Gruul Aggro take on it. Anyway, so first up here, we've got Dimir Control by Zukiwa. Probably massacred that name. Went 44 and 26 for a 63% climb. 63% win rate. And it's basically Dimir Mill, right? So we have Jace the Perfected Mind, which if you can get your opponent down to 15 cards, you can just mill them out and win the game. And to make this kind of an easier way to go about it, instead of doing like the Teresian Mindbreaker or any of those kind that we've seen in the past, this one, when it enters, if it was cast, each player exiles all but the bottom 6 cards of their library face down, and at the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card. So we can make everybody's deck incredibly small, and then hit them with the Jace and just instantly win off of the Doomsday Excruciator. Now, the problem with this is that you've got 6 pips of black, right? So the most difficult part is the strain on the mana. So you do have to have a fairly good mana base to be able to pull this off. The rest of it is just control tools. So we have the full set of Phantom Interference and 3 Steps Ahead to counter our opponent's plays. We've also got Cut Down and Duress, and Disfigure. So basically this one, the advantage to this one over Cut Down is being able to hit the Heartfire Hero or the Cacophony Scamp and not take any damage. We've also got some Hand Hate, so we've got Duress to attack problematic cards in our... Basically, this deck can struggle a little bit against something like Urbrask's Forge. So it gives you a little bit of artifact hate if you can snag it in their hand. Deduce allows you to play this. If they play around your counterspell and don't play into it, you can then card draw. Gives you 2 card draws and 1 because of the clue token. And we also have the removal of Anoint with Affliction, Go for the Throat, Nowhere to Run, and Shieldred's Edict. So between all, you've got 12 pieces of removal, no sweepers, so going for the single point interaction, which there isn't really a board flood strategy, although we've seen Celestia Rabbits starting to do better. And if things hold, I'll actually be talking about it tomorrow. So, but part of the reason why we're seeing Celestia Rabbits come back into play, and Jeskai Convoke, which we'll talk about here next, is because of all the single point interaction that we're seeing mono black running. So very interesting build. Might actually give it a run after I've crafted the Doomsday Excruciators, because I like to sit on my wild cards and collect everything through draft, so I'm always lagging a little bit behind. So we talked about this one a little bit last week in Best of 3, where you see this deck a little bit more often, right? This was an older build, right? This was kind of during rotation we lost Voldaren Epicure, and people were exploring using Spyglass Siren as a way to kind of replace it with the burden of having to add in blue, which we can get to work. So this allows you to still have a target for the Gleeful Demolition to be able to do the turn 3 Knight Errant of Eos, or turn 2 Knight Errant of Eos, and then turn 3 Imidane's Recruiter. The one copy of War Leader's Call helps up against the mid-range and control decks. Case of the Gateway Express is really great removal for the go wide strategy. And then we've got Sheltered by Ghosts, which we're seeing kind of pop in the best of 3 list I talked about last week. I think there was just one copy. And this card has proven to be a very powerful card. Can just win you the game playing it on turn 2. So curious to see if we'll actually get more Sheltered by Ghosts. It's better in the Voltron Boros Auras deck that I talk about on Monday. That's the top performing deck, just because you can make it a larger growing threat. In this archetype, it's a little bit less likely to just get out of control. So, but yeah, this is the deck that kind of showcases if you're coming up against a lot of mono black, run something like this, right? If you're coming up against a lot of single point interaction, play a deck that really needs sweepers to be able to actually control and kind of keep your strategy at bay. So this one was Jeskai Convoke by Abduskin, went 38 and 17, so a smaller sample size, but did 69%, and most of it was just destroying mono black. I think, if I remember correctly, this deck went 9 and 0 against mono black on their climb. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about Gruul Aggro. I was a little hesitant to actually include this one because this is the problem that I'm talking about, right? So we've got the Heartfire Hero and the Emberheart Challenger. This one's not running the Manifold Mouse, but the strategy is still kind of the same thing, right? You've got the Leyline of Resonance for your Cacophony Scamp and Heartfire Hero to try to win on turn 2 with the turn Inside Out. This one doesn't have the Sacrifice, though. It doesn't have the Callous Sellsword. So it has enough different going on and more of what we usually see in best of 3. And since it has a full 15 sideboard, it probably is a best of 3 deck that was run in best of 1. So in their best of 1 climb, though, they went 84 and 50 for a 63% win rate into Mythic. And so this strategy definitely works. It's a little bit more resistant. Excuse me. It's a little bit more resistant to mono black. So you can kind of protect yourself with the Snakeskin Veils, and it's a little less dependent on getting one thing through, like your Slickshot Show Off, right? So, and it has a little bit better dig, right? It's able to go a little bit further into the mid game, which makes it a little bit harder for mono black to just rein in. And but yeah, this triggers your Valiant triggers every turn with the Innkeeper's Talent. There's some nice synergies there, and we've talked about this deck a lot, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. All right, fourth up on the list here is Rakdos Sacrifice by Professor Oak, and went 35 and 23 for a 60% win rate. And I wanted to bring this one up specifically because in our community deck techs, I've heard some people kind of playing around with the Rakdos Sacrifice archetype. And so there should be some pretty good ideas here for you that might inspire, right? So it's kind of centered around the braids and having a lot of sacrifice fodder that you can then also use to sacrifice to cheese out a Rottenmouth Viper. Urbresk's Forge makes it better against the mono black matchups, and also gives you repeatable sack fodder. Disturbing Mirth is a really powerful card that we got in Duskmourn, being able to give you that card draw while also then manifesting Dread that you can then sacrifice later. Clockwork Percussionist makes a really good sacrifice target, same with the Greedy Freebooter. The Spiteful Hexmage allows you to sacrifice the enchantment of the Cursed Roll, so you can draw off of making this into a 3-2. So that's pretty nice. We've got the Torch the Tower here for against the mono red matchups, and you could maybe lean a little bit more heavily into cut downs and things like that to if you're coming up against a lot of Rakdos aggro, for example. But we also have the Final Vengeance, which is nice because it has the ability to exile, and single copy of Duress here. Nothing really, like, this is the kind of thing where, like, maybe you could bring out one Duress to bring in, like, a cut down or an additional Final Vengeance. The downside with the Final Vengeance is the sorcery speed, so it doesn't give you as much of an option against some of the like turn 2 wins and things like that. Um, Probably bring a 4th copy of Torch the Tower over the Duress, just personally for me. But yeah, you know, it's their deck, not mine. So Scavenger's Talent too, whenever one of your creatures dies, giving you additional stuff that you can then sacrifice later to Braids for value, is a very nice little combination. And then you can also sacrifice the Scavenger's Talent itself, right? So we have 1 copy of the Sawblade Skin Ripper here, which allows you to sacrifice other stuff and then put the +1/+1 counter on it, and then you can deal damage to your opponent's face or to your opponent's creatures after doing that. So kind of an interesting little deck. Definitely seeing it pop up more in High Diamond and Mythic than I am in the lower ranks. But yeah, seems like a fun little strategy. And we'll probably talk about Rakdos Sacrifice at some point in the community deck tech. So this week I'll be opening up the community deck tech on Tuesday. So if you have a deck that you would like to talk about and get my feedback on, or just show to the community, look for the post on Tuesday. Number 5 here is Mono Blue Tempo by Seneca. Went 120 and 63, so this was a full climb. Didn't play any other decks on their climb to Mythic, and yeah, that's pretty good, 66%. So Mono Blue Tempo, one of the advantages I think to this is that it's a very budget build, right? I think the only rare, I guess there's 3 Steps Ahead and Haughty Djinn, but relatively easy to craft this kind of strategy, right? So this is not leaning into the Abhorrent Oculus, which works better with the Recommission kind of strategy, and leaning more into the Tolarian Teller and the Tolarian Terror and the Eddymer Crab that we commonly see in the Mono Blue Tempos archetype. So we have Into the Floodmaw and Afara's Dispersal to help up against Mono Red. We've got the Phantom Interference to kind of help protect our stuff from once we have the board developed from the single point interaction. A lot of the similar cards that you'll see, like Moment of Truth. Curate usually see in this deck more than you do in Azorius the Azorius Occulus deck. We'll talk about here in a second. Flow of Knowledge works really nicely for the Mono Blue space. For each island you control, being able to draw a whole bunch and then also discard to get your spell count up, which helps the Crab and the Tolarian Terror. And Sleight of Hand lets you kind of filter into, like, you can run a lower amount of lands because of the Sleight of Hand, and gets your spell count up while also, yeah, kind of moving into it. So I'm not sure that this deck is strictly better than the Azorius Occulus deck. It's doing a different strategy, right? It's still a little bit prone to the graveyard hate. If they are able to remove your graveyard, this becomes 0 power and you have to play these at full cost. So not really giving you an advantage if you're coming up against stuff that's good against Azorius Oculus, then this deck should also struggle. But there's some matchups on the ladder where this is quite a favorable deck. So and I thought this one was a particularly interesting one. So we've seen kind of a Dimir Reanimator strategy. Nothing has ever become mainstream, right? But there's still you're going to be self-milling. You can mill your opponent, and you can win through milling your opponent. But the point of this deck is to use Jace to fill your own graveyard, right? And we've seen this kind of like breach the multiverse off of the Conspiracy Unraveler kind of combo before. I believe I'm blanking on their name. Oh no, Aziz Eldrazi was the one that kind of did it first when, if I remember correctly. But anyway, we've got these big threats like the Volgavath Terror Eater. We've definitely seen in more of the Reanimator strategies is potentially even better than the Atraxa because it is harder for them to deal with it with the single point interaction since they have to sacrifice the 3 non-land permanents, right? But still gives you this like really big threat that helps you win the game, right? So Virtue of Persistence allows us to play from our graveyard. We've also got the Portal to Phyrexia, which allows us to bring things back. We've got the sweeper of like Terror Tide, which helps with the more that our graveyard is affected. And we've also seen more decks exploring the Enigma Jewel. So that's why you're going to see like the Collector's Vault is anything with the activated abilities. You can end up crafting into this kind of repeatable thing, and your planeswalkers like Liliana the Veil and Jace the Perfected Mind have activated abilities as planeswalkers. So then you're able to just, you know, use this as a potential win condition. The interaction for the deck is cut down the Vortex and into the Flood Moss, so it's a little bit low on interaction, because part of it is because you're going to be moving, trying to enable your combo, less so disrupt your opponent's plays. Reenact the Crime is the one that's the card that enables you to do the Unraveler breach the multiverse nonsense. So as long as it's been, you hit it with your Jace Mill, be able to get that copy, and Conspiracy Unraveler allows you to just exile and collect evidence from your deck to be able to play more and more stuff. You play the Breach the Multiverse to get even more, and you just pop off in one giant turn. So, interesting deck. Seen versions of it around before, and yeah, got some interesting things in Duskmourn. Basically, just Volgavoth. And Leyline of the Void too, right? So this card then allows us to kind of hate on the similar strategies if you're facing the mirror match. So can't remember if I mentioned the win rate on this one. So this one was 60 and 41 for 59% by Isaiah. And so didn't quite actually make it to the 60%, but like it was close enough. It was 59.8% or whatever. So like decided to include it. So here's a different take on the Dimir Mill as well. So this one isn't running the Excruciator that's going to make everything super easy to mill our opponent, but this one leaning even further into the control aspect of things, and even more heavily into the Enigma Jewel. So the Enigma Jewels, by the way, if you craft with your Planeswalkers, does work, and so you're able to then use your Planeswalker abilities to mill your opponent. So this is it's almost more of an Enigma Jewel deck, really. But that's why we're running the Candy Trails and the Collector's Vault, even the Stone Brain, all allows you to have more crafting material for the Enigma Jewel. Now, you do have to pay 9 to be able to craft with the Enigma Jewel, so we need to make sure we make it to that point in the game, and that's why we've got a whole bunch of disruption. So we've got the Duress, we've got the Vortex, we've got Into the Floodmaw, Deduce, Nowhere to Run, Shieldred's Edict, and a couple of mill things as well. So like the outrageous Robbery and the Realm Breaker, the Invasion Tree, help us also get closer to being able to mill our opponent. Single copy of the Malicious Eclipse here if we are coming up against a go wide strategy, and then deck's really dependent in getting the Deadly Cover-Up to work here. So I think this is the kind of strategy that could struggle a little bit against a mid-range strategy like Dimir mid-range, where if they can do a Phantom Interference on your Deadly Cover-Up, you're kind of hosed. But Cease and Desist here gives us some graveyard hate. Works for like the Azorius Occulus deck. And then the Artifacts and Enchantments, this can work well against the Boros Auras deck, and I think one or two of these Cease and Desist actually works pretty well, and maybe better than it reads. So, yeah, I keep forgetting the introduction here. So this is Dimir Mill by Angus McFife, went 55 and 37 for 60% win rate. All right, this is another one, Reanimator strategy, going in a little bit of a different direction, but this 4-color Reanimator by Vidaean is basically centered around the Squirming Emergence. It should probably be called the 3-color Reanimator because you don't need to hard cast the Atraxa. This one is running a single plane, so it does give you the option since they're playing a full 4 playset of Atraxa, which increases your chances of being able to actually reanimate it instead of there just being like one in the deck. Portal to Phyrexia also is a really good one for recurring from your graveyard. And then same with one with the Multiverse. If you can get this one down cheaply, then you can get so much value off of the one with the Multiverse that it's hard for your opponent to win. We've got Terror Tide and the Harvester of Misery for some sweepers. We've got Jace the Perfected Mind to help us mill ourselves to enable the combo. Lumra also mills ourselves and can be a big threat to reanimate. And then we've got the Bitter Triumph for removal. The Archaeologist kind of stalls out for a little bit while also enabling the Graveyard Mill. Founding the Third Path allows you to give you the self-mill, but also be able to cast the Squirming Emergence from your graveyard. So that's nice. The Picklock Prankster also enables the self-mill, helps us dig for the Squirming Emergence, which the deck is centered around. And nothing particularly new here. It does look like this one was also a best of 3 deck that was pulled by somebody into best of 1. But again, I focus on best of 1 climbs in my meta review. So, or my meta breakers, I should say. And we got number 9 here is Dimir Control by Alex Rehi. And it went 66 and 34 for a 66% win rate and a nice even 100 games into Mythic. And so this deck is similarly, it's leaning on the Excruciator to then mill them out with Jace. But we see a kind of different approach to it. So the core is kind of the same, and then tools are a little bit different, right? So we have the counter spells, we have the cut down with the disfigures. This one deciding to run 6, so really leaning on having the tools against mono red. Deduce, so if they're playing around the counter spells, then you can draw the card. We've got the Anoint with Affliction and Go for the Throat for this single point interaction. So running a total of 12, and the Farsight Ritual to help us kind of dig into our answer, and then less so leaning on the Deadly Cover-Up for getting this deck to work. But very similar strategy, and also best of 3 list. Yeah, so good. It was a good week for the Dimir Mill strategy. The other thing that I'd like to do during these meta breakers is just talk about some, like, this one is more of a meta pick, right? It is a popular deck, even though it may not be the most top performing archetype. And so I don't usually talk about like mono black discard in my meta review because it has some bad matchups, which then knocks it out of the top 8 top performing archetypes. So this is a good time to talk about the decks that are hitting into Mythic. Like, you know, mono black discard does make its way into Mythic. You can, depending on your matchups, depending on your approach, get there. So Azorius Enchantments is one that's in the top 8 most popular archetypes from Duskmourn, really leaning on the Sheltered by Ghosts. This one does have some unique takes to it, though, which I think kind of helps improve it. So this one, can't remember if I already said this one, but it was by Mahira, 67 and 37 for 64% win rate. And, you know, Sten, for example, we don't usually see this card included in Azorius Enchantments, right? But having some interesting synergies with the deck. And spells you cast cost of the chosen type, right? So you would choose enchantments, right, in this one. Makes it so that you kind of get like the Inquisitive Glimmer effect as well. So a lot of your stuff can get incredibly cheap. Now, there isn't a whole lot of stuff that gets discounted. Like we've got the Sheltered by Ghosts, which would then cost 1 less. We've got the Enduring Innocence, which would then just cost the double white. The Enduring Curiosity, which would cost the double blue. And Entity Tracker is another one that whenever you cast an enchantment, you draw a card. And then the Enduring Innocence works. I'm surprised they're not, if they're running the Enduring Innocence, I'm surprised they didn't get the Glimmer Tamer in here because of being able to trigger the 1/1 that then draws off of the Enduring Innocence. But I trust them, you know, like, I trust that the deck probably has enough already for the card draw that you don't need to lean that heavily into it, especially with the Enduring Curiosities, right? But you could take maybe this out and lean further or lower down in the curve, I think is probably more of a common approach. We also have the Silent Hall Creeper in here, which can kind of give some good value, but isn't necessarily included in every deck that I've seen in Azorius Enchantments, right? So definitely a unique take. Spellbook Vendor, being able to create an enchantment every turn, works well for the archetype. The core of the deck, though, really, right, for me at least, is the Shard Mage's Rescue, the Optimistic Scavenger, and the Sheltered by Ghosts. So I was a little bit surprised to see this one only at 1 Shard Mage's Rescue. but maybe they weren't experiencing that much single point interaction. And Ethereal Armor here then works well with the Voltron aspect of just building a very big threat. One of the things that I like about this is if you don't have the single point interaction and you don't need the Shard Mage's Rescue, then the Hull Creeper is unblockable and works really nicely with the Shelter by Ghosts and like to build into a Voltron threat. And you've also got No More Lies here to protect the board against any sweepers, and yeah, just kind of I don't know. I thought this one was an interesting take on a popular archetype, and 64% into Mythic. This definitely improved its matchups than what we've been seeing in Azorius Enchantments before. All right, number 11 here is Boros Tokens, and just wanted to talk about, again, this was another one that like we've talked about in the past, but isn't usually included in my best of one meta review because it has some difficult matchups. But it's still nice to talk about and keep on the radar for those who are, you know, not really in tune with everything that's going on in best of one standard. So Boros Tokens is one that we've seen since the last release in Bloomborough. This one not having any Duskmourn cards, centered around the Urbrask's Forge being able to give you the card draw with the Caretaker's Talent, Beza for stabilization, Sunfall, and Temporary Lockdown to control the board-centric strategies. Control then can kind of struggle against the Forge if they're leaning on black in single-point interaction. So you have options to win the game if you are up against a deck that doesn't have a is more of a control strategy or a mill strategy, but these cards being dead cards in your hand does make that a more difficult matchup. But if they are a board-centric strategy, you have a ton of tools to eliminate their threats, right? Also, Torch the Tower, Get Lost, Lightning Helix, Abrade. This one's leaning very heavily on the single-point interaction, including the Elspeth Smite, and Soul Partition, to just have a bazillion threats, or bazillion answers to your opponent's threats. And then we have the one Carrot Cake. So sometimes we see this one included as more than just one because of being able to trigger the Caretaker's Talent on your turn as well as your opponent's and give you some of the life gain. But in best of one, leaning just purely into let's have a whole ton of disruption to answer Boros Auras, Rakdos Aggro makes a lot of sense to me. Oh, yeah, almost forgot here. I keep forgetting if I mentioned this one. So this one was by Lupio87, went 79 and 45 for a 64% win rate. And similarly, this is a good time to talk about Azorius Occulus. This was another one that at the beginning of the format was in the top 8 top performing archetypes. It has since dropped a little bit out of the top 8, and but it's still a very good deck, and it's still a deck that you are going to bump into on your climb, commonly in the top 8, based off of popularity, not win rate. So the Azorius Occulus deck is, this one was by Icus, and went 92 and 57 for a 62% win rate, and it's a deck that preys on mono black. So if you're, as far as like the rock paper scissors goes, right, like Boros Auras and Rakdos Aggro struggle against mono black, and then mono black struggles against Azorius Occulus, and it's kind of a way that they balance things out. And then the Oculus deck struggles against the Boros Auras and the Rakdos Aggro, and so that's kind of the rock paper scissors, if you will. So this deck, we've talked about this one a fair amount, but just really quickly, you're trying to get a Oculus or Haughty Djinn out cheaply with the Recommission or the Helping Hand. This one deciding to lean more heavily into Recommission. Usually we see a 4 Helping Hand and 2 Recommissions. This one switched it around and doing 4 Recommissions and 3 Helping Hands. So a total of 7 to really focus on reanimating your threats from the graveyard. We also have the classic enablers of the Picklock Prankster, Moment of Truth, Chart a Course, some disruption from the Soul Partition and into the Floodmaw, counter spells with 3 Steps Ahead and Phantom Interference, and then we're running Sunfall here, which not every Azorius Occulus list is running Sunfall, so I thought that was kind of an interesting inclusion. And we have a couple of ideas from the opponent here, or from the creator here, just some ideas that they were probably playing around with, adding in. to help up against certain matchups. So, all right, and the 13th one, the final one that I want to talk about this week, because some weeks I trim it down a little bit. This week I thought there was enough interesting diversity going on that I just kept them all. So we got Mono Black Slasher, and this one is one that I was talking about it last week. We're seeing this one pop up more and more. Unstoppable Slasher, being able to one-turn kill your opponent with the Bloodletter of Aclazotz. You'll probably bump into it on your ladder climb, right? The Unholy Annex has been pretty good, and we're seeing this pop up more in the control archetypes. Works particularly well with if you're going to be including other demons like the Bloodletter of Aclazotz and the Archfiend of the Dross. We see sometimes in like Golgari midrange and best of 3. But anyway, yeah, basically you're just like, you've got a control deck that then has a one-turn kill combo. If the one-turn kill combo fails, there's still other ways to close out the game just through the value of like Preacher of the Schism and Sheoldred the Apocalypse. You have a ton of disruption with Sheoldred's Edict, Nowhere to Run, Go for the Throat, Deep Cavern Bat to hate on their hand, Cut Down for against mono red. Tiny Bones allows you to play the stuff that you've killed early from your opponent. And then Gix's Command and Aclazott's Deepest Betrayal both give you a mid-range stabilization. So the lifelink off of this and the lifelink off of this both allow to kind of help if you make it to turn 5. Sometimes you want to be able to get out of the later game reach from your opponent. And this is the sort of deck, though, that I think struggles maybe a little bit against the control matchups. Again, like the Dimir Mill strategies, where all of this single point interaction is then going to be a dead card and difficult maybe for this deck to close against a control matchup. So every deck has a pro and con, right? It has a strength and a weakness. So if you have any questions about how do I beat this deck? I've been coming up against it an unfair amount of times. I've got ideas for you. I can probably help you out. So welcome to my community. If you're new here, do one of these every Sunday. And again, tomorrow I'll be talking about the best of 1, best of 3 meta, talking about the top performers instead of the mythic outliers, if you will. And have a wonderful day, and I hope you had a wonderful weekend, and I will catch you all tomorrow. Take care.